and a little bit about us. And I'm going to let Amy and Craig, our co-presenters, introduce themselves in a moment. But my name is Jenna Filipkowski. I'm the head of research here at HCI. I'm going on my 4th year of being here at HCI. My background is in IO psychology. And I encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn if you have any questions about this presentation or anything in general. And one little plug, we're doing in 2017 a call for speakers. We're looking for innovative content, innovative stories about talent management practices. So if you have any stories you want to share or some thoughts, please reach out to me. I'm interested in talking to you to uncover those stories for the content that we produce next year. So Amy and Craig, thank you for being here. I'm going to turn the mic over to you and let you introduce yourselves to our audience.
All right, thanks, Jenna. Hi, HCI. I'm excited to join this webcast with all of you today. My name's Amy Bybee, and I head up the Marketing Research and Customer Support programs here at Paradigm Learning. In my current role, I interview human capital leaders to gauge training results, and I keep up with the realities of L&D in their organizations. I am also responsible for all of our content development and sponsored research. I'm really excited to participate on today's webcast because a big focus here at Paradigm Learning is trying to improve the development of first-time leaders. So thanks for having me, Jenna. Craig?
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Jenna and HCI, for having us. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Craig Schwipps. I am the Content Marketing Strategist and R&D Lead for Paradigm Learning. It's my responsibility to be the front line to evolving industry trends and demands, whether that's interviewing clientele about their needs or struggles, or creating specific content to optimize our paths for more conversation. I get to collaborate with basically every department, and I'm super excited to be here and have a great discussion with everyone today. Turn it back over to you, Jenna.
Of course. So thank you both for being here. Craig is very excited to be here, so we love his enthusiasm. So we're going to see more of that throughout the presentation. But we're going to kick things off first with a poll, and this is an open-ended poll in the widget that you could see on the left-hand side of your player. We want to know, what are the biggest challenges for first-time managers as they transition into their roles? So Ben, can you display the results? We have some people answers right now. So Amy and Craig, you can see the responses as they come in. Communication, moving away from being a peer to a supervisor. As you read these, anything that comes to mind, or are they reflective of your experiences as well?
Absolutely. Seeing this feedback, it's great. The problem that we most often see that I can see quite a few of you have touched on is that first-time managers are often promoted from an individual contributor level for their technical ability rather than their leadership skills. As you can see, they often have no formal education or, as we say, business acumen training. And these promotions happen in waves across so many high-growth organizations. We've constantly found that business acumen is a great way to fill these gaps that often cause poor decision-making, the inability to align department goals to those of the organization, asset mishandling, problems in communication, engagement with the team, and more. A great example, actually, can be seen in Paradigm's collaboration with Baker Hughes. They were focusing on bridging a lot of these previously mentioned project management issues with their next generation leaders. And it was fantastic to see that after attending some business acumen training simulations with Paradigm, we had about 79% of our learners report a clear understanding of how and why Baker Hughes makes business decisions and how financial data and analysis fit into their project success. And we also had over 66% that felt more confident in their knowledge about the business and its financial and strategic drivers. So while there are obviously challenges, as we go more into this presentation, all of our listeners, you should see how we have drivers that can combat these issues. Here at Paradigm, we continuously see how business acumen training plays a huge role in transitioning those first-time managers. Would you agree, Jenna?
Yeah, and it seems like a lot of people are citing lack of experience, training,
Yes.
And I like the one quote was going from me to we, so kind of conceptualizing what the mindset of a manager is and how they have to think about others first and not just themselves. So a lot of the soft skills paired with the technical skills, paired with the business acumen, and we're going to cover all of those as we go forward in this webcast. So Ben, let's close the poll and continue on. So like I mentioned, this is what part of our Talent Pulse research series. We released this, I believe, in the summer All my research projects are kind of blending together from this past year. But HCI has a tried and true research methodology to uncover the issues facing first-time frontline supervisors. And in our research, we do a research scan and engage practitioners and thought leaders in conversations to understand more about the topic. We also read a lot of secondary research, and we do interviews with our members to understand more. In this research study, we had a survey, and we distributed to almost 300 organizations, 35% of which are from organizations between 100 and 1,000 employees. And today we're only going to highlight some of the key findings from the research, but the full report is available for download on our website. If you just go to the research landing page, you could see it there. It has the little fishies on it. And one note, HCI research is produced and distributed to HCI members for free, and there would not be any HCI research if it wasn't for the people who take time out of their day to complete the surveys. So we have around 12 reports a year and surveys continuously. So if you're interested in taking our research and being the first to see the survey results, join our survey panel, and you can also find that on our website. So like I said, this is going to be some of the key findings from the research. There's more in the report. The one thing I love to start out with here is 97% of people who responded to our survey agree that frontline managers are essential to business success. And we know that 70% of the variance in employee engagement is explained by the manager-employee dynamic. So managers are important. And if you look at the chart on the right here, these are the most important indicators of frontline manager impact that have been observed. So people know that frontline managers increase productivity, improve their team functioning, are important for engagement. They serve an important role in our organizations. However, the unfortunate part is only 58% agree that frontline managers have the support they need to be successful. So we agree that they're important, but almost 60% think that they're being supported. And only half agree that their organization adequately invests in frontline managers. So we see when we talked about the challenges in our first poll, training and development was an issue, and we see only half of our organizations we studied only invest in their frontline managers. So a lot of work to do. Would you agree, Amy?
Yeah, actually, just zoomed right into those last two percentages, and I think I just kind of want to step back for a second. Let's think of who these frontline managers are. They're the retail managers responsible for more than $80 million in revenue for a brand. They are the airline managers who oversee a yearly passenger volume worth more than $160 million. They're the banking managers who deal with an upward of 7 million questions from customers a year. These aren't executives at corporate headquarters. They are the hidden yet crucial managers of frontline employees who directly impact the financials of an organization and are drastically underdeveloped and supported. So those last two percentages are pretty astonishing. To take it one step further, these managers are particularly important in the industries with distributed networks of sites and employees. So we're talking about infrastructure, travel and logistics, manufacturing, healthcare, retail, food service, banking. Those make up more than half of the global economy. So they're directly correlated to the customer experience, and yet research shows these managers operate as cogs in a system with limited flexibility in decision-making and therefore little control over the financial success of their organization. I mean, to be frank, they're the middleman, and that means that they're meant to maybe communicate decisions. They're not encouraged to make them, to ensure compliance with policies, not to use judgment on their own or discretion, to oversee the implementation of improvements, not to contribute ideas or even implement improvements. So the system above makes companies less productive, less agile, and less profitable. At companies that have successfully empowered their frontline managers, the resulting flexibility and productivity generate strong financial returns. So development is definitely key. A great example, after financially developing a program at a client site this year, we transformed a typical middleman into an empowered leader. Here's what it looked like for one retail store manager just to have this different development. They were better armed to make decisions, so they were able to reduce worked hours by 19 to 25% while increasing sales by almost 10%. It achieved this result by cutting the time store managers spent on administration, restructuring their work and that of their employees to focus on the areas most relevant to customers, such as cleanliness of stores and upselling efforts at the cash register, and creating easy to understand performance metrics that managers now had enough time to coach employees on a daily basis. The result would be to make them all more productive. So, Jenna, I would say that frontline managers have a pretty big impact, wouldn't you?
Of course, and that leads me to the next quote. So we collect research from qualitative responses in our surveys, and I love this quote because I think it sums up what the state of frontline first-time managers are experiencing. I'm not going to read it to you, but just to sum up, we appoint individual contributors into management roles that are not suitable for them at all times, and we tend to let them sink or swim. And an area of great focus for this organization was to provide people in the organization with training, so when they get the chance to go into those roles, it won't be such a big stretch. So I love that. To try to combat that sink or swim mentality, HCI developed our new Manager Lifeline. So you think a lifeline you throw to someone who's about to be drowning. So these are the 6 tips we have for any new manager and how to set them up for success. And through this webcast, we're going to walk through this lifeline in terms of understanding what are those 6 factors and 6 components that you need to be considering when you have a new manager. So we're just going to get started and look at the results. So organizations that do have this new Manager Lifeline model, and just to point out what they were briefly: identify objectively, develop diversely, train heavily, onboard continuously, and contact frequently, and also start early. Organizations that do these components as measured in our survey report better outcomes, such as higher employee engagement. And we know that managers do affect the engagement of their employees. So it's not surprising that we see that organizations who do invest in their new manager development do have higher engaged employees. So there is reason to this method and this model, and we're going to walk you through the points right now. So start early. When you consider a new manager or a first-time supervisor, we want to start their development sooner than later. And that leads us into our first poll, because we want to know from you, how many months before or after starting in a new role do frontline managers receive leadership training? So is it 2 years before their first manager responsibility? Is it 1 year before? Is it at time of transition? Is it 12 months after? Is it 2 years after? Is it more than 2 years later? When do you give leadership and manager training to your employees? So we want to hear from you. If you could use the polling widget to the side of the player. And Ben, can we see some of the results as they come in? So Amy and Craig, it looks like at the time of transition is what most people are saying right now, or they're saying it's after they've moved into this role. Does that surprise you?
Nope, not at all. Actually, it's crazy. It doesn't surprise me at all that there's no nothing before the fact. And actually, it's even more astonishing because I don't know how many times we see it in the research that leadership development is one of the most valuable elements, right, in a talent management strategy. It creates the environment for employee engagement, performance, and business growth. So with this particular group of people, knowing their impact, they should be considered high priority on the list to receive this training as soon as possible, if not in pre-promotion, thinking of bench strength. It's shocking, Jenna.
Yeah, especially the 21% who say 2 years after a leadership position that they'll receive training. So, definitely shocking.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So let's move forward, Ben. So this is, and HBR actually had a great article on this in 2012, and they say the average age of a supervisor is 33 years old, but most managers or leaders don't participate in any leadership training until they're 42. So that's a whole decade of practicing managerial behaviors without any training or guidance or feedback or coaching on them. So, and I also think that once you start in a behavior and spend a decade doing it, it's kind of hard to reverse your ways. So I think that when you think about the training that you will provide when the supervisors are in their mid-career, how that training can kind of adjust some poor behaviors that were learned along the way. And this research, this figure here also from the research shows where individual contributors end up in organizations. So if you look at the little blue boxes, those are the individual contributors, and 45% of them do not end up in any sort of managerial role, and that makes sense. They're just given more responsibilities in their current position as individual contributors and also given more money. 30% end up as frontline managers, 15% end up as mid-level managers, and 7% enter the C-suite or executive level. So I think it's important to consider that not all individual contributors can be or want to be leaders. Thus, you must have to consider alternative career paths and rewards must exist for the strongest performers. And thinking that these employees are not any less valuable to the organization because they're not managing a team. And like I said, most individual contributors advance in their careers by taking on more responsibilities and making more money rather than promotions to leadership positions. So when you think about the strongest performers who might end up as leaders, you also need to think about, do they want to be leaders, and is that the right fit for them based on their career aspirations and also their personality. So Craig, what do you think about that decade of practicing poor managerial training? Or manager behavior.
It was absolutely astounding to me when we first read that stat that the average age is 33 and they usually don't participate in leadership training until a decade later. But we have actually seen that firsthand because Paradigm had someone contact us, a woman with 10 years of tenure in her company who was asking about business acumen training for leadership development. And to our surprise, as we continued communication with her, we found out that she wanted the training for herself. It wasn't a call for a large group class or new hires or transitioning managers. She herself had been untrained for a decade, so we have seen it in person. And that should really be non-existent. Our leaders should be trained from when they are high-potential individual contributors well before they even become first-time managers to avoid this. It's imperative not only to prepare one for a leadership role, but making sure the organization as a whole has proper bench strength being built, which is another key lever to focus on. When you have the right bench strength, you're able to fill those leadership gaps as soon as they occur. And I'm sure that our listeners have heard or read of the importance of keeping the talent pipeline strong. This just illustrates that it needs to happen sooner. Back over to you, Jenna.
Yep. So like our first part of our model, start early, can start thinking about who your next managers are going to be, building that pipeline and thinking about how can we give them developmental opportunities sooner than the time of transition. So moving forward, as we look to the second piece of our model, identify objectively. And the key points we hit home in the research here is don't rely on subjective recommendations that might be prone to bias or error. You want to assess frontline manager leadership potential with a combination of methods. So like things like performance reviews, calibrations compared to other talent, having standardized criteria, using assessments or assessment centers, and also ask them about their role aspirations. Don't just assume that just because they're a high performer or a strong performer that they want to have a leadership position or a role. So you need to consider a lot of different factors and not just like, oh, this person is similar to me, it's on a similar career path as me, I think that they would make a great leader. You need to consider a well-rounded approach when you identify objectively. So this slide here shows the different ways to identify leaders by seniority level. So for example, senior executives, which is the red column in the back, and on the right-hand side, the number one way we identify them is through formal succession planning process. If you look at the green, which is the frontline managers, these people are being identified through interviews, through other managers recommending them, through performance reviews and ratings. So like I said, again, these methods are useful to assess perceptions of soft skills in the candidate, but they might lack the rigor and objectivity that other methods may exemplify, such as using assessments or having a more rounded approach. Another way I was thinking about today as I prepared for this is using stretch assignments to identify future leaders. So thinking about giving more responsibilities to individual contributors and seeing how well they excel in them, and maybe giving them projects to lead and looking at that as an indicator of future performance as a role. Another thing too, in the 9 box, I know I've just read an article about how organizations aren't using that as frequently because they're struggling to how to define potential and what does potential mean. So I'm interested to know if other of you are also planning to eliminate the 9 box for that reason, in terms of what's potential, how do we measure potential, what does potential mean when businesses change so quickly. So just briefly on this, how to identify managers and the different methods that we're using it. And we want to be more objective, and we also want to use a combination of methods. So as we go forward, the next part of the model is called develop diversely. So like I said, it also, when you identify through a lot of methods, you also want to develop through a lot of methods. And this slide here shows how important the following competencies are for frontline first-time managers at your organization. So we asked them, is this important? And the majority of people said all of these competencies are important for frontline managers. So obviously frontline managers have big shoes to fill in terms of what's expected of them. But as we see, the number one competency is ethics and integrity. And things like communication, flexibility, developing their team, having relationships. Technical expertise is also important, but only 75% say that is true. Things like business acumen, which I know Amy and Craig are going to cover soon. So we think about what's important for frontline managers. What are your thoughts here, Amy, on these? Do these ring true for you?
Yeah, certainly every single one of them are important, but, obviously naturally I do zoom into business acumen. And actually not just because Paradigm Learning is sort of known for that, but the new definition of business acumen can make a big impact. So even just 5 years ago, prospects came to us looking for business acumen training with the need to achieve learning outcomes of financial literacy, understanding financial statements, and understanding complex business decisions. Basically, the need to give a non-financial manager a quick MBA. But now, today, that definition has certainly evolved. In addition to the financial literacy components, we are seeing prospects needing business acumen training to provide big picture thinking, better decision making, and the ability for the employee to see how they individually impact the bottom line. This new definition takes a regular employee mentality and sort of shifts it into that business owner mentality. So the ability to take ownership, accountability, all while thinking, how do my decisions impact the bottom line? That's pretty powerful stuff. We see business acumen as being important for every job, any level, but especially important for these managers who have multiple direct reports, especially if they're first-time managers. Managers who don't understand the business they work for, they fall into a habit of making those uninformed decisions that do not positively affect the company. And managers with strong business sense are able to understand company goals and then align them with the goals of their team. So managers who display this competency are also more effective at leading others for a few reasons. First, they can express clear goals that others are motivated to follow. And second, they inspire others to be more engaged in the business as well. So that's all I've got for you, Jenna.
Thanks, Amy. And just moving forward, because I know we have a lot to cover yet. So this section is about develop diversely. And in this slide here, we show the different methods that organizations are using to develop managers or individual contributor high potentials at different levels. So the number one way to develop frontline managers is e-learning, followed by formal classroom training, followed by tuition remission, stretch assignments, and action learning projects. And one thing that is glaring to me when I look at that and look at also the high potential section as well, is just the opportunity to learn from their peers and from their managers as well. So where's the mentoring? Where's the coaching? I think there's a missed opportunity for frontline managers to gain the knowledge and experience and see those behaviors role modeled in their managers, so the mid-level managers, the senior executives. So I would like to see more opportunities for frontline managers to learn from others, versus just sitting in a classroom and learning those skills and those competencies. So Amy, do you think that's needed as well, or anything else that frontline managers need to be successful?
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%, especially if we could even think about marrying up the classroom with the mentoring with some sustainability after would even be a better scenario. I think I'm not surprised by this, but I was a little taken back by the e-learning taking the first spot in the development for this particular audience. Not that it really may work effectively as the other methods, probably more because it's easy to implement. And it actually reminds me, I was shocked. I went to Brookstone this week to do some Christmas shopping. And when I went there was one employee and one store manager working. I ended up waiting in a 20-minute line just behind one customer because she was upset. She had, I guess, picked up a drone from the shelf. She thought it was priced at $49. It was actually priced at $179. And the poor store manager was scrambling behind the register. He ended up honoring that $49 price point on a product that's selling at $179. So first off, ouch to the bottom line. That's a perfect example of bad, uninformed decisions. However, I decided when I finally got up to the register, I would ask him a little bit about, how he became a store manager at Brookstone. So after about 15 minutes, he told me he had been rapidly promoted from a key holder to a store manager after only being at Brookstone for less than a year. He also said he received additional training 45 days after his promotion. And he felt that he was only given that training because he was headed into the holiday season. And what kind of training was he given? He was given 10 asynchronous modules that he was supposed to, click through in the back during breaks. So no surprise there. So that whole experience just reminded me that sometimes we really need to get not only that classroom environment, but I think it's important for these frontline managers to come together from all different areas and get together around a classroom, have mentors present, have SMEs there, so that they can have that collaboration and that rich discussion, and they can sort of get that buy-in they need to go back and feel like the company is behind them. So I was a little disappointed to see these results as well, Jenna.
Yeah, also, so what we see here on senior leaders, executives, the number one method they're being developed is through a professional coach practitioner. So I know I've done some research this year, and through our, we also developed a course on this and how to develop a coaching culture. So those coaching skills are not just available to your executives, because we know coaching is so powerful to empower your employees, to get them to be thinking about how they could develop in their own career rather than telling them what to do. You empower them through coaching. So I think we like to think that coaching should only be observed and reserved for executives, but I think when you develop a coaching culture, those coaching skills can be learned by your mid-level managers, by your frontline leaders, by your peers, so everyone has access to those skills. So I think, like you said, Amy, we need to do better than e-learning, do better than formal classroom training. We need to have more opportunities to learn from others and to be coached. So as I go forward, the next section is called Train Heavily. So this is about how much the quantity of training that's available to your first-time frontline managers. And this leads us to our third and last poll. So we want to note from you, how many hours of training are available to these individuals? Is it 0, 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 20, or more than 20 hours? So Ben, can we see the results come in? So kind of mixed, Amy and Craig, between 0 and more than 20, which is very interesting.
Wow.
And obviously these results are coming in live as we see. So we'll just
Wow.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Craig, what do you think
I'm
about?
shocked.
Yeah, what do you think about this, Craig? 0 doesn't surprise me, but it seems like some people are offering at least more than 10 hours of training for these individuals.
That is a little surprising to me, and then clearly there are a diverse number of hours available from company to company. I wonder if we could go ahead and look at HCI's findings on the results that you took prior to this webcast.
Yep.
So as you guys found out, the typical number is usually between 1 and 30, and that's obviously not the case across everyone. Some did pull that a lot. But what I think is an important takeaway is that it's not always the number of hours available that makes the biggest difference for first-time managers or even frontline employees. And let me give you some examples to show what I mean. I'd like to share some information on 3 different companies that have been put on Fortune's Human Capital 30 list and are ranked on Fortune's 2016 100 Best Companies to Work For, which essentially means these are businesses that have put their people front and center, and it shows. So first, we have Quicken Loans, an online mortgage lender that offers its full-time employees a staggering average of 350 hours of training every year, which is apparently working because they only have a 13% full-time staff turnover rate. Second is Highland, the creator of OnBase, a business software firm, and they provide usually between 50 and 77 hours of training each year. And my last example will be Alston & Bird. They're an Atlanta-based law firm that gives their full-time employees an average of 64 hours of training every year. So clearly, let's all admit that there is a vast difference between 350 hours of training and 60 hours of training and 10 hours of training. Yet these 3 organizations make the top list, and the answer to why kind of boils down to the type of training provided, as Amy went into a few slides ago. Say your organization provides 200 hours of training to all its employees. That sounds pretty great, having that much time and energy to devote to bettering yourself or learning a key metric that the organization is focused on. But what if all 200 of those training hours are spent on PowerPoints, lectures, and online quiz training? No classroom, no facilitator interaction, no games or simulations. Which I'm not saying that you shouldn't use any virtual training or e-learning whatsoever, but as we did see a couple slides ago, formal classroom training still is a top priority and need for hypos and frontline managers. We believe that it should be number 1 because the right kind of training can make all the difference in the world, regardless of whether you're allowed 30 or 300 hours. And training hours are essential, but the reality is the type of training goes into whether those hours are effective or not. What are your thoughts on it, Jenna?
Yeah, I definitely agree more about quality over quantity in terms of number of hours. So if you think about if it's 100 hours spent just reading or browsing training materials versus being a more integrated or blended learning approach with access to mentors, classroom, e-learning, I would think that would be more effective. So we want to think about the quality. And just one piece, let me just go backwards 1 second. So we had a question about in terms of how are these being ranked. So these are being ranked in terms of frequency. So these organizations say, what methods are you using? So e-learning is the most popular method for high potential individual contributors. That doesn't mean that's the best method. That's just what we know is what is being most popular for organizations today. So I'm just going to continue on, and the next part of our model is called Onboard Continuously, and onboarding is my favorite topic of all time. So I have a lot to say here on this topic. And 2 of my biggest concerns with onboarding is, 1 is it's often neglected, And then 2 is that those promoted from within are often left out of the onboarding program. So we want to extend onboarding to external hires as well as internal hires, and a process you can term as reboarding. So you think about moving to a new team or a business unit within an organization can just be as unfamiliar as joining from the company and from the outside. And in past research, HCI research we did this year, we found that 81% agree that onboarding internal hires is equally as important as onboarding external hires, but only 27% report that they are effectively onboarding employees that are promoted to a new position. So these are your managers that we're talking about. And this lack of emphasis on reboarding hinders effective internal mobility practices, and it also sets inconsistent performance expectations across the organization. And from this research, we see that only 38% of organizations have an onboarding program for first-time managers hired from within the organization, and while 55% have an onboarding program for first-time managers hired from outside. So people from hired within, they do have some institutional knowledge, they do have a network, but maybe they don't have everything that you could provide with those outside managers. So in 2016, we also did a research report on onboarding, and we think that there's 4 important components when you're thinking about your onboarding program for internal hires and also for external hires. And we called these the invested onboarders, and these people do all 4 of these things. So for one, there's a formal onboarding program that's focused on people and culture and not just paperwork and process. We also see onboarding be a partnership among HR, manager, and the employee, and senior leaders and business units. We also have it seen as a continuous process, not an event. It's not one day-long orientation. It spans many weeks, many months, and it can extend to the first year and beyond. And also organizations that are invested onboarders, they make sure they measure their programs to make sure they're working. And they also mention time to proficiency or time to minimum productivity within their organization. And we see people who are invested onboarders report better talent outcomes. They're twice as likely to report reductions in all or most of new hires' time to proficiency. And they also think that this onboarding, when they invest in it, it's a continuation of a positive candidate experience. So they don't sell them really hard on the organization, get them in the door, and just provide a lackluster or a lacking experience once they're hired. So Amy, any thoughts on, do you love the topic of onboarding as much as I do? I think it's very important and also very important to think about when you consider your first-time managers.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think the reboarding, too, there's so much involved with onboarding, Jenna. At least that's what we've seen here, even in the past 12 months at Paradigm Learning. And after countless amounts of research this year on the topic ourselves, and considering new hire orientation as well, we've seen 2 consistencies amongst organizations that are sort of hitting home runs with their onboarding. And I think it has to do a lot about, what kind of content are they providing, what are they teaching up front in those first very precious weeks, right? And we're seeing that, these companies that are doing well, they're immersing new hires into the culture of the organization, the mission, vision, and values. And second, they're teaching their new hires the business of the business and how they individually fit into it, especially the first-time leader groups. And so you don't really have to be a rocket scientist to see how those 2 components alone could increase the employee buy-in to the point of seeing some real results with the retention and the employee to be successful. And not to mention, these 2 topics are fantastic to conduct reboarding for employees after they have been in the organization for some time, especially when thinking of a rapidly promoted new manager. So I think the reboarding and the proper kind of content you can continue to use not only for an onboarding a new hire, but for reboarding purposes, could certainly increase that 38% that you have there on your research. What are your thoughts, Jenna?
Yeah, I agree with that. And so Tracy has a question that I don't know the answer to, and I could look it up for you, Tracy. But she wants to know, how do you best measure your onboarding program? So I know there's two metrics out there, that time to proficiency and time to minimum productivity. I think that it's up to you, the organization, to define what proficiency and productivity means, and have many people try to answer that question. So you have the direct supervisor looking at that answer, you have the employee weighing in, you have their peers weighing in, and obviously that productivity and proficiency is going to vary among roles, so that it does make it hard to measure. But I think it's also important to think about, when you're constructing a program, an onboarding program, to think about the outcome and what you want to get from it, and having a metric in place to make sure it's actually achieving those objectives. So I'm going to go forward in the interest of time and go to our last component of the new Manager Lifeline, and that is contact frequently. And HCI believes that managers have the ultimate responsibility for developing and engaging talent and building organizational success through people. And HR and L&D professionals need to support the relationship between managers and their teams early on by formalizing this development of frontline, first-time leaders. And that also means starting early, but also checking in and contacting frequently these new managers to make sure everything is going smoothly. So in our research, we found that 68% have HR check in with first-time frontline managers to see how things are progressing. So that's great. That's more than half. Don't forget about that their new managers might be sinking or swimming in their new roles. The second part of this question is, at your organization, if a frontline manager was not meeting expectations, what is the next likely step? And I think this is great. 62% would offer more training and development opportunities. 15% would demote them to a non-management individual contributor role. 7% would think about termination, and 5% would transition them to another business unit. So it looks like offering more training and offering second chances it's the norm for organizations. This, I think, brings apart another bigger question is, what is the ramp-up time for frontline first-time leaders? And when do you know if this person is going to be successful or not? And when do you know that it's maybe not the best fit for them to be leading other people? And if you make a mistake in this identification, what do you do? And I think those are very hard questions. They're probably individualized per the organization. But Amy, what do you do? Do you have any easy answers to those questions?
No, this is actually the area that I tend to be most passionate about, because I think more from the proactive approach to that development component. And, your research is talking about what happens when frontline managers are not meeting those expectations, right? So more of that proactive training before the going gets tough and before they're not successful. So after 18 years of creating business acumen training, we were sort of awakened as a company by this very don't forget about them mentality over the last 2 years. We saw so many of our clients and some of the biggest companies in the world implementing business acumen training in one-day or half-day sessions. The reviews from participants were outstanding. They were excited to go back to their jobs and make changes, make better decisions. And then what? Exactly. Then what? There was no more, which once again is that sink or swim mentality. So we recently revisited our business acumen offering to incorporate post-session sustainability. The golden ticket in this sustainability, and I know we've seen it in the industry, is once the training is over, kind of that ability to create the action plan and get participants using the training on the job. I mean, that is the key in the end. If they're using the training and still not performing, there might be one of those underlying issues. And for managers to track the progress of the action plan items in real time also doesn't hurt. So before we go today, I'd actually like to share one story that it was an eye-awakening experience for us at Paradigm Learning. FIS Global, which I'm sure you've all heard of, they're a leader in financial services technology. They made a decision to implement business acumen training a few years ago to a group of 60 leaders and frontline managers from different departments across the organization, because they needed managers to see the big picture, align to the goals of the organization, and also be equipped to make better business decisions when running their departments. After the training was done for the day, they were asked to make an action plan. The manager of product management completed her action plan item, and it was to take a big picture view of their department and act immediately by responding with a process discovery and improvement initiative that involved not only their team, but other managers that had attended the session, from client relations, implementations, accounting, and system administration. The result was a broken payment system. That's what she concluded. Her action plan item initiative to act immediately put more than $500,000 in-year dollars directly to FIS's bottom line. And it was a great example of not forgetting about them, and a really terrific story to know that after that session was over and after that development happened, the managers were checking in and the action plan items were keeping those employees motivated. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Jenna.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think the accountability and not forgetting about them is extremely important. And it's hard to do, but I think it makes for any successful talent management program. So we are concluding our presentation, and we're going to open it up for Q&A. So if you do have any questions for Craig, Amy, or I, please use the chat player to write them in. And I will want to point out you can download those slides and have access to these links. Here is some research that we've done in the past on similar topics, and also an ebook from Paradigm Learning about business acumen antidotes. I always say that wrong. Excuse me. So as we move forward to our Q&A, please use the chat function to write in any questions for us. Amy and Craig, I do have a personal question for me, actually. Thinking about business acumen training, how customized is that to the individual organization? Like, is business acumen just business acumen, or do you have to consider different cultures, different ways organizations do things? Can you just kind of explain that a little more?
Yeah, absolutely. In the end, the goal is for any employee that's going through business acumen training to be able to see the big picture of their organization and how they fit into it. So at Paradigm Learning, we take we teach it through simulation, and we have that sort of sandbox experience where we, you're immersed into a simulation, you immediately buy the business, and you kind of go through 3 years of owning a business and making decisions. In parallel, you're also looking at what's it like in my organization, how do these types of decisions impact my bottom line. We have levels of customization from very simple and then very, very complex, depending on the outcomes that the organization is looking to achieve. So in the end, I would say most of our participants leave and they feel like they're able to make better business decisions because they see how the business that they currently are employed with works. And so
it really delivers a business owner mentality way of thinking as well, not just from running the simulation of the business, but a way to tie it back to their own that really lets them see the impact of their decisions along every step of the way.
And I have another question for you both, too. So when we think about the technical expertise that high performers have that typically get them promoted into these manager positions, how can we get them to be thinking more about the soft skills that are necessary to manage people? So how can we prompt them to think about that more often?
Yeah, it's something we hear a lot. Go ahead, Greg.
It is something that we hear a lot. I think a lot of it just depends on kind of what we discussed today, starting early and continuing and following through. They're going to need the proper training to prepare them and start them thinking along these. We try and provide as much content and resources as we possibly can to these high potentials, and we want them to see, we need them to succeed for the business to grow. I think it really just comes down to investing in them. The more that you invest in these people, the more that they will in turn invest back into the business.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I know we experience quite a few different ways that training's implemented. So we have a lot of our clients that incorporate business acumen training as open enrollment. So a lot of the times, that's not necessarily as effective as if you're adding business acumen training and making it a part of your leadership development curriculum and making it just an actual staple in that curriculum. So you are maybe taking the fear out of an open enrollment, and I see a lot of finance and understanding the big picture where I might not enroll as an employee versus it just becoming a part of my leadership development. So I think that's another component to think about.
Great, thank you. Amy and Craig, any final thoughts before we part on how we get set up first-time managers for success?
Get them started early.
Yeah, I think we covered it pretty well.
Yeah, your research was great. We really appreciate it.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much. I love when I love when we get more usage out of my research reports. And our research is available on hci.org to download now for free with an HCI membership. So Amy and Craig, thank you so much for joining us today and providing commentary to the findings. It's nicer to have that than me just reading some stats and some numbers. So I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, HCI members, for joining us today. We'll see you on another webcast and have an enjoyable rest of your day. Thank you.